Okay, so we've decided which picks to use and whether we want to use picks or fingers. So now we actually have to think about how are we going to strum? What are we going to do? And for this example, we're not going to worry about the left hand at all. We're just going to hold it over the fretboard so we don't get a bunch of open noise. But the first thing to think about is, where is the motion coming from when we strum? I mean, basically you have shoulder, elbow, wrist. Are we strumming from the wrist? Are we strumming from the elbow? Or are we coming all the way from the shoulder? We can pretty much eliminate coming from the shoulder. It's not very practical, and it's going to be a lot of excess and wasted motion. So most of our motion is going to come from right here, from the elbow, especially if we are strumming chords that are going to use all 6 strings or 5 out of the 6 strings. We need to think about, are we going to be coming down across all these? And if we are, we're probably going to want to have something that has a pretty wide range of motion. Just using the wrist doesn't give us quite as wide of a range of motion as using our elbow. If we're going to be picking a chord that says maybe just 3 strings in it, yeah, then maybe the wrist, because we don't have to go very far, so we don't need that huge range of motion. So when we're actually strumming, we have to think about, what is this pick doing? What's going on here? Basically, all that's happening is the pick is just being dragged across the strings. And when I am picking down, which right away we'll just work with a downstroke for right now, one thing to keep in mind is my pick facing? Is it pointing towards the ground? Is it pointing up towards me? What is the angle of my wrist? So when I'm doing a downstroke, one thing I like to do is have my pick a little bit pointed up and at me. Not straight up, but almost like it's pointing back in towards my chest. And this angle, this slight, you could think of it as an upward angle, is going to allow the pick to freely glide across the strings. We don't want it to be catching on the strings and having to put a lot of force into it. We don't want to be just pushing it through the strings. We want it to glide across the top of the strings. Now, when we're coming back up, we're going to think about just the opposite of that. It's the same principle, but now we might want to have our pick facing a little bit down for the same reason. We don't want to have to pull through the strings right here. We want it to just glide across. And the way to achieve that, as I said, when we're coming down, we're going to have the pick facing slightly up, and you can have your hand almost straight up and down, but what I like to think of is my wrist is slightly out, so the meaty part of my thumb is facing a little bit out, not way out, but just a little bit. That's what'll give me that downward angle on the pick. When I'm coming back up, I can think of the opposite of that, where this part of my hand now is facing a little bit out, so I can angle my wrist out a little bit just so I can get that pick to point down this time. So now let's try this really, really slow. First, we're just going to do 4 downstrokes. I'm not going to worry at all about fretting anything on this hand. We're just going to do 4 downstrokes, and we'll call this scratching because it kind of makes a scratchy noise. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. And on each of those, we're going to strum down. So ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. And one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when we get comfortable doing that, we're going to add an upstroke. So on 1, we'll stroke down. On 2, we'll strum back up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, and if you notice, like we talked about, having the pick facing slightly up on the way down will help you just glide through the strings. When we're coming back up, we turn our wrist ever so slightly to give us a little bit more of a downward angle, and that helps us glide across the strings on the way back up. So one more time, we're gonna go down on 1, turn our wrist just a little bit, up on 2, turn back, down on 3, up on 4. So one more time, here we go. Down, up, down, up. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now it's not going to be a huge exaggerated motion where I'm really just flipping my wrist around every time, going down, then coming back up and down. It's really just subtle, slight motion, just so we can get that pick to move smoothly back and forth.